With its massive loom, the Galactic Arena enormous and menacing construction made up of black metal that appeared to inhale the brightness from far-off stars. The stands were crowded with people starting from all over the galaxy competing for space, ready to see another vicious arena. Battles that are a spectacle were more than just a means of survival. Shows of sheer might and supremacy. Strength fighter came in with knowledge they would either be respected more or less. Frequently their lives in this, at the heart of everything, was the arenas. He was an unbeaten champion and a huge figure, enormous, even by extraterrestrial standards, having armor-hardened scales and muscles trembling just beneath his hands could break stone, and his roar reverberated like an ape warning through the arena floor was drenched after every battle. With proof of his vicious manner, a concise reminder of what was expected of any, the challenger was stupid enough to confront him. One triumph after another had strengthened he exuded confidence and arrogance. He was a metaphor for a living, not just a warrior. Legend today, walking into the arena, the audience roared in anticipation of his name. He stopped and gazed at the sea of faces, a grin extending over he lowered his mouth to a sharp tooth line. His fists in a gesture of admiration, display of total might that he had engaged in hundreds, perhaps thousands, and none had almost perfectly matched him. With each triumph he had become more audacious, ruthless, and more contemptuous of anyone who ventured to challenge him. As he looked around the throng, and his smile expanded, he was aware of his reputation made people afraid, but he also delighted in the rush of embarrassing new. He enjoyed observing the faces of his opponents change from assurance to fear as they knew that their strength was insignificant. Here, not against him, making fun of them turned into his method of asserting himself as part of his routine that nobody, regardless of how talented or whispers, brave, could resist him. Started making the rounds of the stadium with the new rumor had it that challenger was waiting. Someone from the far side of the galaxy is a species that is better known for diplomacy and exploration above combat. The champion heard and laughed. A few quotes regarding the newcomer. Hilarious, especially though such a monster would consider confronting him. He turned to face an arena staff member, telling him to bring this in. The sooner the so-called challenger could get rid of them as quickly as possible. He has yet another triumph to his credit as the gates creaked on the arena's far side. A silence descended upon the throng and the atmosphere became stiff and excited, crackling like an electric charge exceeded a certain amount. Things appeared practically inconsequential in comparison to it was the champion's towering mass. A person wearing basic clothing doesn't apparent weapons or armor, only a pair of calm eyes that looked across the arena with serenely examining the area surrounding him. The gap between his opponent's location and a ripple of laughter went between them. The champion himself, through the crowd unable to conceal his amusement, he snorted. The arena coordinators were lost due to human error. Sending a monster like this from their imaginations, it was nearly an insult to confront him. Pointed a clawed finger while leaning forward at the person and publicly giggling at his. Is this the only thing they could do? I'll be done with you if you discover a human. Before the mob disperses, the human didn't recoil when he encountered the champion's serene, unshakable stare. There was no bluster in his expression. Posture, no needless motion, just he was silent and ready. But he didn't respond to the jeers that reverberate around him. His attention stayed constant as a rock in the midst of the roar of mockery, and the champion experienced a burst of laughter. Annoyance at the person's inaction, his quiet seemed to be a rejection. To recognize the danger in front of him, he appeared to be analyzing, waiting and examining the champion's each day move, each and every motion and phrase that was disturbing in a manner that shocked even the champion dismissed it, blaming it on the ridiculousness of the circumstance. This was merely a human after a fragile, feeble creature from a little unimportant planet where the battle would be over in a matter of minutes, if not seconds, as the person remained standing there. Unflinchingly, a voice of doubt in the champion's subconscious, the human posture was well balanced, such as someone who was fully aware of what they were. The champion's actions pushed the idea, dismissing it out of hand. This is his arena, his territory. His power was greater than his strength. Absolute, the laughing of the crowd started to diminish the original laughter, making space for a nervous interest that the person hadn't expressed. He hadn't even changed his position with a word. Just stood with his gaze collected and peaceful, staring at the champion, as though anticipating the champion's smile dimmed. He felt a little irritated. He was used to being afraid and panicked. Competitors who were unable to conceal their fear. But this person's steady, silent focus and sight were not the same. With the champion made the decision to put an immediate stop to he lifted his fist muscles in a charade. coiling in preparation to crush this person and demonstrate once more his status as the arena's champion who hasn't lost yet. Deep, he couldn't get rid of the weird feeling inside. Feeling that this battle may not just as he had anticipated, the human steered ahead into the rough, glaring arena lights, turning every audience member's eye. He seemed little to him, almost inconspicuous in the absence of the towering height or abrasive foreign characteristics of earlier challengers. Wore simple clothing, and he had no weapon with no armor to protect him from the alien audience erupted in jeering laughter. His bulk and absence of intimidating traits, they were shocked to learn that a human was a creature frequently written off as weak would voluntarily enter an area where the only rule is, did anyone know how to survive against the champion? Because of his vicious power, the champion's his smug smile widened as he peered down at his opponent, is assured that he will win. Flexed his enormous arms purposefully. He enjoys emphasizing his size and might. Observing the response of the audience as they applauded for him to win this battle, it would be merely an expedient formality. Simple victory. His confidence was on the verge of he was so bored that he couldn't even must squander time on someone in order to. He leaned toward the person, but it was unimpressive, and publicly ridiculed his opponent while laughing, insulting him and sending him a "you must be lost for a human to confront me." Sneered, his tone brimming with disdain. The person's expression stayed composed. His look remained unchanged and he did not answer. Showed no indication of fear or insults and intimidation from the champions jumped off him like they had nothing weight. He stood calmly and intently, examining his rival with a look that appeared curiously premeditated, while the champion basked in the admiration of the crowd. The people appeared to be untouched by the tremendous spectacle's noise. He had a single reason for being here. And the thunderous crowd dispersed into the he doesn't care about the background in this peaceful concentration started to erode the champion's self-assurance. He was used to challengers' responses to his bulk and taunts with trembling signs of fear or retreating. But this person didn't flinch, was uneasy since he didn't respond. He chalked it off, brushing it aside. Up to misguided bravery, the human didn't realize what he was facing. He was unable to comprehend the power he was going to confront this deadly wish. Nothing more than the conceit of the champion flared. He was eager to make an example from this novice to demonstrate to him how unimportant people were in the human. Took a look at the galactic order. Taking a deep breath while firmly standing, maintain a grounded and balanced stance. There was no movement waste. Obvious nerves, as though he had received training all of his life for this particular moment. The crowd mocks the champions. He didn't seem to receive any of it. Seemed nearly at ease, but his eyes provided an alternative explanation for the calm externally. There was a strong focus and unwavering resolve that was unexpected. The few bystanders who observed the intensity of his eyes, they whispered, detecting something among themselves, something peculiar about this silent challenger. The champion, though, was unaware that he proceeded to make fun of and mock, resolved to frighten the person in order to make before the combat had started. He broke. However, the human quiet remained as a wall in opposition to what the champion said. His unwillingness to participate in the jeers directed at acknowledged the remaining chuckles from the crowd, regardless of how the humans remained steadfast as he spoke loudly, displaying a composed assurance that suggested the champion hadn't encountered prior to the arena collapsing into a strange quiet, a change in mood. The throng was practically tangible at one point, chuckling and contemptuous, now seen with a blend of interest and expectation. They had been alerted by the human. Not even a single word, not even a single claim that he was now a mystery and a conundrum. They were unable to fully comprehend. The words began to spread through the who was this audience like a ripple. Human, what was his plan and why? Did he not respond when the champion's his smirk faded just a bit? Bravado began to emerge as there is something about this rival that he couldn't establish a feeling of direction that didn't belong in the arena's pandemonium filled with blood. Yet he shrugged it off. Hesitant to allow uncertainty to grow, he was the victor, the most formidable combatant. And he would demonstrate this in the cosmos. The brutal realities of the arena. As a human, the human's ticking second silence turned into a statement in itself. His quietness pressed into the arena, diminishing the champion's self-assurance, wallowing in the knowledge that he'd always sensed that someone was standing here who wouldn't admit dread in those who didn't appear to acknowledge the champion's standing, or the champion is mocked by the crowd. His voice became quiet as the laughter subsided. Heavy, emanating from his adversary, it wasn't just a fight anymore. Felt like a test, a persistent query the champion's brute force. Could strength can really overcome this unforgiving? Settle the initial doubt in the champion's thoughts, a sense that he never gave himself permission to experience. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. The belief that this would be another fight, the human's victory, was inconsequential. He told himself that he was simply another weakling. Beast, a simple foe, yet even as he attempted to compress his eyes, couldn't abandon the people without a doubt. Look, there was something there that subconsciously forewarned him that the battle wouldn't be as easy as he'd pictured. The two rivals standing facing one another, and a tight silence seized the champion assessed his opponent in front of the crowd. Sneering at the smaller human body, and without any weapons, he launched his. The audience was shocked by the speed and strength. As he sought to swiftly halt the altercation, his each blow was tremendous. Determined to shatter bones in order to crush, he anticipated that the human would break. Each time his fists are beneath his force, the human stepped narrowly as it flew. Avoiding every terrible blow, the throng gasped in surprise at the hum. His motions were accurate and swift. Wasn't as strong as the champion, but every movement he made was controlled. Effectively, he appeared to foresee each attack right before landing, modifying his stance with a strange serenity. The champion's annoyance started to manifest as he repeatedly missed his attacks. When he first failed to connect, he discovered that his blows were out of control. Were surrounded by cheers and empty air. From the crowd became softer and now filled incredulously as the champion made adjustments. The human took his position and moved, rushing in so quickly that it took the unexpectedly. The champion's fists hit with very accurate targeting precision. Each hit on the champion's body was swift, nearly surgical, and not to do direct harm but to interfere with. Targeted the champion's weak spots. Didn't even know that could be taken advantage of. With each blow, the champion stutter and lose rhythm, interrupting his equilibrium. The audience gazed in awe as the human focused with little effort on accuracy rather than brute force, and the champion's timing caused him to yell, more than only annoyed that his self-assurance had been a shield, an indisputable truth. But now he attempted to recover control after it cracked. He launched himself at the person, using with fresh rage. He moved more quickly. His blows were more forceful. Resolved to put an end to this humiliation, to smash the opponent who had the audacity to make him appear stupid. Yet the person didn't hesitate, didn't panic. Instead, he stayed composed and allowed the champion is harmed by his rage. Each time the champion launched a strike, he overcommit, making himself vulnerable to it for a split second. The human repeatedly took advantage of his strikes, were like sudden shocks meant to destabilize instead of overwhelm him. Remained near enough to avoid each assault, yet close enough to retaliate as soon as the champion used to battle. Quickly came to an end and found himself exhausted. Huge amounts of energy were lost on missed punches and prevent strikes for each and every bit of. He threw a force that appeared to spend just a small portion in exchange for the audience started to change. The original trust they had placed in their champion, starting to falter, and human motions maintained a cadence and flow that the audience hadn't anticipated. His battle style was not like anything they had ever seen. Every step is more akin to a dance than a battle, calculated to throw after measuring each blow. The champion loses equilibrium with each. The champion made a mistake that caused the fans to faith was undermined, and a growing off for human skill and strategy. The human eyes were focused and unblinking, focused on his adversary, reading all of his. He seemed to anticipate every strike. Sid countering and stepping with nearly. He wasn't battling, he was using mechanical precision to overwhelm him as he struggled to outlive, to allow the champion to exhaust himself. His strikes were accurate, yet each one serves as a reminder of the advocate that physical strength by itself wouldn't ensure victory. He was demonstrating that accuracy, perseverance, and talent could be equally potent to brute force. The champion's annoyance was evident. His motions were less frequent and his breathing was more labored. Managed every missed punch that failed. Attempt to overwhelm the chipped human. His self-assurance. His body started to display minor but noticeable signs of fatigue. Unquestionably, his strong blows were unsuccessful. Their punches' initial strength slower and less confident in his position. Spent a great deal of effort attempting to control because he was exposed at that time. With the champion's last outburst of rage, swung frantically trying to get a hit. By sheer, the guy ducked his movements with power. Smooth and quickly countered series of attacks directed at the weakest points of the champion, or these were intentionally struck by targeted joints and nerves, resulting in the body of the champion to falter. His enormous form was made to kneel while the audience looked on. In awed quiet, they were once unbeatable. Now the champion is humbled in front of the calm. The champion's fury is a calculating human. As he battled, his pride became damaged. To overwhelm his adversary, with every failure, frustration grew. Try to move him now with a mixture of rage. He rushed forward in desperation with everything he owned, disregarding caution, resolved to establish his superiority. Each blow was delivered with extreme vigor. Harder, faster, unrestrained power, giving up accuracy in favor of pure aggression. He was obviously trying to crush, to demolish, and remove any uncertainty regarding his strength. Yet the person moved alongside, steadfast poise and replying, not with panic, but he was more focused, changed with every change in the champion's strategy of changing his posture, proper timing to correspond with the growing careless hits. The person who was watching, meticulously planning each move, examining the champion's patterns, assaults that were now foreseeable. Simplicity was fooled by their rage, where once the strength of the champion has been, now it was a scary and controlled chaotic storm with no plan, and exposing him every time that the champion became so furious that he, a human, discovered a gap and hit it, specifically focusing on the impacted areas. The champion's equilibrium in motion, with each well-timed punch, the champion, he faltered, his strong body starting to indicate the areas where his breathing increased. His motions were delayed by the building up stress in the arena, once full of opportunities for the champion to fall. The gathering fell into a tight hush. Observing a change they hadn't, expecting the human to push ahead, not to rule but to keep going, destroying the confidence of his opponent. His songs weren't made to incapable of the disruption they were intended to cause, to discredit the foundation of the champion. The champion's every retreat was a tiny triumph. For every mispunch, evidence of the human approach. The champion, once the personification of power, now found it difficult to keep up and was compelled to defensive stance that he was unaware. He searched the area as though looking for responses in the hushed crowd's faces, but in his despair, he found none. Champion made an attempt at a last all-or-nothing attack, so he collected what he had left, strength, and sprang forward in the hopes of take the person by surprise. But the human maintained his composure and unwavering focus, avoided the charge with ease. Reversing the momentum of the champions against him with a string of accurate motions, he hit a series of blows, each one aiming for the champion's vulnerabilities that weren't intended to be hit to put a stop to the conflict, but to exhaust, additionally destabilize the champion, causing him to stumble. When the mighty frame weakened, he was exhausted by his own carelessness. He swayed with aggression, striving to keep his composure and his self-assurance, devastated by the relentlessly determined assault. His body, which he was so used to dominance, now weighed heavily on him. Could hardly sustain himself, he glanced at the person, his face displaying a combination of incredulity and annoyance. The dawning's discovery that brute force couldn't guarantee victory against a mindful of the crowd, until it is crowded stayed mute despite applause and laughing. Their group's eyes focused on the developing conflict. They had anticipated a rapid human defeat, a demonstration of unadulterated strength that would confirm the title of champion, but now confronted with a contestant who had transformed the battle into a thorough analysis of the champions. The human strength increased, changed the arena, changing the emphasis from talent to spectacle, from strength to accuracy. Of the champion's last endeavors were used up, his strength was exhausted, and his assaults diminished to weak swings that the person easily deflected. He was having trouble breathing. Threatening presence lessened. The guy stood serenely in front of him, and constant, subdued reminder of the strength of patience and restraint. The champion's his pride had caused him to lose his reliance on his own strength, leaving him exposed to a rival who was knowledgeable about the craft of perseverance. As he fought to stay standing, the victor encountered, and unquestionably, his power had its limits. And he had reached those boundaries. Discovered, possibly too late, that the human had expected this and knew it all along. Each move, and had retaliated without strength, but the fight is fought with resiliency. Wasn't lost by brute force, but through the gradual decline in trust. The crowd's dismantling of pride, their adoration, was shown in quiet, changing from the vanquished champion to the person who had demonstrated that power. Hollow, the champion, lacked a plan. He could hardly raise his arms anymore. Just acknowledge the person's triumph. He had not been defeated by a superior power, but through an uncompromising spirit, a serene determination that had transformed, opposing his own power, in that the champion's realization that he had encountered not only a combatant but a strategist who hadn't looked for glory by mastery, rather than force. The individual had revealed his vulnerability, excessive dependence on power, and had abandoned him. With a lesson he would always remember, the champion was left with last blows, Weakened, he moved slowly and laboriously. The audience was captivated as the hum stood in front of him composed and steady. His posture remained steady and his breathing even. The silence in the arena was a burden on the vanquished victor who had gone in the battle that some of his previously unbeatable. He could hardly stay. His pride was stripped away as he stood up. The human did not boast about his strength, did not lift his arms in triumph. His expression stayed unreadable and concentrated. However disconnected, there was no indication of arrogance but merely a silent acknowledgement of he had not battled for the finish of the conflict. Praise or applause, nor did he yearn for the audience's astonished attentiveness to his victory was not found in the show, but rather in the methodical oversight that had brought his opponent to his knees. Seemed to notice this and gave their customary applause. Substituted by an implicit regard for the champion, the insight was almost too much for him to handle. He had depended on his influence on the crowd's adoration to establish his identity. Yet here he was humbled by a combatant who had demonstrated that power was merely a component of the assuming that the person had shown patience, skill, and strategy were equally, possibly even more potent, and in the champion felt the weight at that very time. He hadn't been defeated because of his own arrogance. He was outwitted by a more powerful force. Outlasted the opening of the arena doors, but the human didn't go right away. Instead, he glanced a silent appreciation directed at the champion. Between them, it wasn't sympathy or contempt, simply an acknowledgement of the end of the conflict, a message that the battle had been one of perseverance. Not the champion used all of his might and exhausted, but was able to nod in comprehension now. He had been surpassed in what he had missed. By an adversary, not by brute force, who was skilled at exercising constraint, who had led him to exhaust himself. Through his own unbridled violence as the person turned away from the throng. Changed. Unsure of how to respond to this, wasn't the customary festivity that loud applause for a decisive smashing victory. Instead, they discovered themselves at a moment of surprise lesson that they had just observed visit the champion to celebrate in the he gave unadulterated strength and spectacle to any altercation save for this silent, a composed human had demonstrated something to them. Otherwise, a strategy that prioritized control, that valued discipline, overpower the person left. Disappearing into the shadows that aren't even backward, he left a startled crowd in his wake. A remembrance and a fallen hero that would remain in everyone's thoughts. Who had seen the altercation? He hadn't had vanquished a rival. He had left in serving as a reminder that even in a location founded on violence, mastery of one could defeat pure force by themselves. There was a heavy stillness throughout the arena. That was a unique time that felt almost sacred. When acts of violence had been eclipsed by control, the vanquished champion stayed. His thoughts were racing about the battle and the foe he faced so gravely undervalued. He mentally reenacted the constant stare, the rhythmic movements, patient posture, the carefree manner in which he absorbed all of the insults and strikes that had it seems that weakness was actually something much more powerful than a will that could not be disturbed by a smart mind. And concentrated despite the champion's enormous power, now realized that he had encountered the kind of strength that endures, greatly surpassing his own physical capabilities. In stories of the days that followed the victory of humanity spread throughout the galaxy, people from far-off planets mentioned the silent warrior who had defeated the champion unbeaten, without a word, without a show of triumph or pride. The hum's tranquility grew as the legend did. Manner and unwavering determination becoming from signs of a brand new type of bravery that was not dependent on force or spectacle. His triumph questioned the core of the culture of the arena, presenting the notion that genuine strength lay in understanding when to attack, mastering oneself to the same extent as the experience. The champion's opponent such a profound impression that he no longer counted on himself as invincible. Based only on the human's power taught him to be humble and had compelled him to confront the boundaries of his own authority. He thought about the struggle for hours, attempting to comprehend the silence perseverance that had triumphed over his own brute force. Started training gradually. Has a distinct objective, concentrating on not only on power but on command of discipline, traits that he has previously derided yet now greatly revered. Over time, the champion went back to the arena. Changed, he no longer relied only on his unadulterated strength, and the audience felt the transformation in him. He battled with a new intensity, a methodical strategy that mirrored the knowledge he had gained from his reputation. Changed and was no longer determined by his dominance, but on his recently discovered reverence for combat skills. He carried a skill of constraint with him. The recollection of the person who had demonstrated he had the ability to balance patience. In the meanwhile, humans vanished from the public spotlight without leaving any indication of his presence in the arena and his narrative, but stayed alive and was transmitted through innumerable recountings serve as a reminder of the battle that altered the galaxy's knowledge of the strength. He had entered the arena as an unfamiliar and apparently unimpressive rival, but he departed as a legend. His influence engraved on the arena's structure and in the thoughts of everyone who had witnessed him, and the arena, previously an area of extreme violence, now carried with it a deeper legacy, served as evidence of both authority but to the tenacity and authority that, when used with accuracy, resists all forces. The triumph of humanity became more than merely the tale of a fighter's victory, became a reminder and symbol of power may be a variety of things, and that is accurate. Few people could achieve mastery, yet everyone could show respect.